The evening of October 12, 2019, began like countless others at Riverside Fellowship Church in Grand Forks, North Dakota. The youth group had gathered in the basement fellowship hall, their voices echoing off the wood-paneled walls as they shared pizza and laughter before their weekly Bible study. But this particular Saturday would be remembered not for its normalcy, but for the mysterious disappearance that would shake the community to its core and test the faith of everyone involved. 17-year-old Madison Claire Hartwell sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, her auburn hair catching the fluorescent light as she listened to Pastor Jeremy Richardson explain their evening activity. Madison was beloved by everyone at Riverside Fellowship. A senior at Grand Forks Central High School, she had been attending the church since childhood and had grown into a young woman of remarkable faith and compassion. "Tonight, we're going to do something special," Pastor Jeremy announced to the circle of 15 teenagers. "I want each of you to share a prayer request, and then we'll record a short video prayer for someone you care about. These videos will be our gift to the congregation, a way to show how our young people are growing in their faith." Madison's best friend, Olivia Rose Martinez, nudged her playfully. "You should go first, Maddie. You always know exactly what to say." The two girls had been inseparable since third grade, bonding over their shared love of music and their desire to serve others through their faith. Pastor Jeremy, a gentle man of 34 with kind eyes and an easy smile, had been leading the youth ministry at Riverside Fellowship for 6 years. He was married to Sarah, a kindergarten teacher, and they had 2 young children of their own. The youth of Grand Forks adored him for his authentic approach to faith and his ability to relate to their struggles without judgment. "Madison, would you like to start us off?" Pastor Jeremy asked, holding up his phone to record. The other youth group members, including twins Christopher and Matthew Sullivan, quiet Hannah Grace Peterson, outgoing Tyler James Anderson, and artistic Emma Catherine Wells, gathered closer to listen. Madison smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sure, Pastor Jeremy." She looked directly into the camera, her green eyes bright with sincerity. "Hi, everyone. I'm Madison Hartwell, and I wanted to pray for someone really special tonight." She paused, collecting her thoughts as the room fell completely silent. Even the youngest members of the group, 13-year-old siblings Joshua and Rebecca Thompson, stopped their usual whispering to listen. "I want to pray for Mrs. Eleanor Whitman," Madison continued, her voice growing stronger. "She's been in the hospital for 3 weeks now, and I know her family is really scared. But I also want to pray for something else, for God to help us all remember that even when things seem impossible, He's still working in ways we can't see." Madison closed her eyes and began to pray with a maturity that often surprised adults who knew her. "Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight with hearts full of hope, even when circumstances seem hopeless. We pray for Mrs. Whitman's healing, for comfort for her family, and for wisdom for her doctors. But most of all, Lord, we pray that you would help us trust you completely, even when we don't understand your plan." Her prayer continued for nearly 3 minutes, touching on themes of faith during uncertainty, God's sovereignty over all circumstances, and the importance of supporting one another through difficult times. As she spoke, several of the other youth members wiped away tears, moved by the depth of Madison's faith and the genuine love in her voice. "We know that you see everything, Lord, even the things that are hidden from us. Help us to rest in your perfect love and timing. In Jesus' name, Amen." The room remained silent for a moment after Madison finished praying. Pastor Jeremy lowered his phone, visibly moved by what he had just recorded. "Madison, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing your heart with us." As the evening continued, other youth members shared their own prayers and requests. Christopher Sullivan prayed for his grandmother who was struggling with dementia. Emma Wells prayed for a classmate who was battling depression. Tyler Anderson prayed for unity in his family as his parents worked through marital difficulties. By 8:30 p.m., the formal part of their gathering was winding down. Parents would begin arriving at 9 p.m. to pick up their teenagers, and Pastor Jeremy always used the final 30 minutes for informal fellowship and cleanup. "Madison, would you mind helping me carry these folding chairs back to the storage room?" Pastor Jeremy asked as the other youth members began gathering their belongings. Of course, Madison replied, stacking chairs with practiced efficiency. She had been helping with church setup and cleanup for years, taking pride in serving behind the scenes. As Madison carried the last stack of chairs toward the storage room at the far end of the basement, Olivia called out to her. "Maddie, I'm going to wait for you by the front door. My mom will be here any minute." "Okay, I'll be right there," Madison called back, disappearing into the storage room. Pastor Jeremy was in his small office adjacent to the fellowship hall, reviewing his notes for Sunday's youth Sunday school lesson and preparing to upload the prayer videos to the church's social media accounts. The basement had grown quiet as most of the youth members had already gone upstairs to wait for their rides. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. When Olivia realized Madison hadn't emerged from the storage room, she walked back downstairs to look for her friend. "Maddie?" Olivia called, pushing open the storage room door. The room was empty, chairs neatly stacked against the walls, but no sign of Madison. "Pastor Jeremy," Olivia said, poking her head into his office. "Have you seen Madison? She was just putting away chairs, but now I can't find her." Pastor Jeremy looked up from his computer, confused. "She's not in the storage room? That's odd. Let me help you look." They searched the entire basement methodically, the fellowship hall, the kitchen, the storage rooms, even the small bathroom. They called Madison's name repeatedly, but heard no response. Pastor Jeremy's confusion began to shift toward concern. "Let's check upstairs," he suggested, though he couldn't imagine why Madison would have left the basement without telling anyone. They searched the main sanctuary, the church office, the choir room, and every other accessible area of the building. Madison was nowhere to be found. More troubling still, they discovered that the church's side door, which led to the parking lot, was standing slightly ajar, though Pastor Jeremy was certain it had been locked earlier. By this time, other parents had arrived to pick up their children, and word quickly spread that Madison Hartwell was missing. Olivia's mother, Carmen Martinez, immediately called Madison's parents, David and Susan Hartwell, who arrived at the church within minutes. David Hartwell, a 45-year-old accountant at a local firm, was known throughout Grand Forks for his steady demeanor and strong faith. Susan, a nurse at Altru Hospital, was equally respected for her compassionate nature and tireless service to others. The couple had raised Madison to be independent and responsible, and her disappearance was completely out of character. "She would never just leave without telling someone," Susan said, her voice shaking as she clutched David's hand in the church parking lot. "Madison is the most responsible teenager I know. Something's wrong." Pastor Jeremy had already called the Grand Forks Police Department, and Officer Michael Chen arrived within 15 minutes to take statements and begin a preliminary investigation. Officer Chen was a 12-year veteran of the force and a member of Faith Community Church across town. He understood the gravity of a missing teenager, especially one as well regarded as Madison Hartwell. "When was the last time anyone saw Madison?" Officer Chen asked as he interviewed the group gathered in the church parking lot. "About 20 minutes ago," Pastor Jeremy replied. "She was helping me put away chairs in the storage room. I was in my office working on my computer, and Olivia was waiting upstairs for her ride. When Olivia went to look for her, Madison was gone." Officer Chen made detailed notes as he spoke with each person present. The other youth group members confirmed the timeline and described Madison's normal behavior throughout the evening. Everyone agreed that she had seemed completely normal, happy, engaged, and showing no signs of distress. Was Madison having any problems at school or at home? Officer Chen asked David and Susan. Any recent changes in behavior or mood? None at all, David replied firmly. Madison is a straight-A student, involved in drama club and volunteer work. She's never given us a moment of trouble. She was excited about homecoming next weekend and had plans to help decorate the church for the Harvest Festival. Susan wiped away tears as she added, Officer Chen, my daughter has never disappeared like this. She texts me constantly, sometimes too much. The fact that she hasn't answered any of our calls or texts tells me something terrible has happened. As Officer Chen examined the church building, he noted that the side door showed no signs of forced entry. However, the door's automatic locking mechanism appeared to have been disabled, allowing it to be opened from the outside without a key. Pastor Richardson, Officer Chen asked, who has access to this door, and when was the last time you checked the lock? Several people have keys, Pastor Jeremy replied, including myself, our head deacon Thomas Mitchell, our church secretary Mrs. Dorothy Lewis, and our maintenance supervisor Kevin Barnes. I'm certain the door was locked when we arrived this evening. I always check all the doors as part of my routine. Officer Chen made note of everyone with access to the building and requested their contact information for follow-up interviews. As the initial investigation continued, he also requested that the Grand Forks Police Department's Detective Division be contacted due to the suspicious circumstances surrounding Madison's disappearance. Detective Sarah Thompson arrived at Riverside Fellowship Church at 10:45 p.m. Detective Thompson, a 15-year veteran of the Grand Forks Police Department, had investigated dozens of missing person cases during her career. She was known for her thorough approach and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, Detective Thompson said as she approached Madison's parents, I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. A teenager doesn't just vanish from a church basement without explanation. We're going to find out what happened to Madison. Detective Thompson's first step was to interview Pastor Jeremy about the evening's events in detail. They sat in the church sanctuary, with its stained glass windows reflecting the parking lot lights, as Pastor Jeremy described every moment from the time the youth group gathered until Madison's disappearance. Tell me about the prayer video Madison recorded, Detective Thompson requested. Was there anything unusual about what she said or how she acted? Pastor Jeremy pulled out his phone and showed Detective Thompson the video he had recorded. Together, they watched Madison's heartfelt prayer for Mrs. Eleanor Whitman and her reflection on trusting God during uncertain times. This is beautiful, Detective Thompson observed. Madison seems completely at peace here. There's no indication of distress or fear. She paused the video at the end, studying Madison's face. Pastor Richardson, I need you to send this video to my email address. It may become important evidence. As Detective Thompson continued her investigation, she discovered something that sent chills down her spine. The timestamp on Pastor Jeremy's phone showed that Madison's prayer video had been recorded at 8:23 p.m. According to the statements from other youth group members, Madison had disappeared sometime between 8:35 and 8:45 p.m., less than 20 minutes after recording her prayer about trusting God even when things seemed impossible. The timing is unsettling, Detective Thompson told Officer Chen as they conferred in the church parking lot. This girl prays about trusting God during uncertain times, and then disappears within minutes. That's either an incredible coincidence or something much more sinister. By midnight, the Grand Forks Police Department had initiated a full-scale search for Madison Hartwell. Officers searched the immediate area around Riverside Fellowship Church, including the Red River banks just a few blocks away and the residential neighborhood surrounding the church. The Hartwell family's home on Belmont Road was also thoroughly searched, though no one expected to find Madison there. Detective Thompson wanted to eliminate any possibility that Madison had somehow made it home without her parents' knowledge, perhaps due to some kind of medical emergency or confusion. As the clock approached 1 a.m., word of Madison's disappearance had spread throughout Grand Forks via social media and phone calls between church members. Riverside Fellowship's phone tree, typically used for prayer requests and event announcements, became a communication network for organizing search efforts. Thomas Mitchell, the church's head deacon and a retired high school principal, arrived at the church despite the late hour. He had been awakened by a phone call from Dorothy Lewis, the church secretary, who had heard about Madison's disappearance from another member. Pastor Jeremy, Thomas said as he approached the weary group still gathered in the church parking lot, I've contacted our entire deacon board. We're organizing search teams for First Light tomorrow morning. Every able-bodied member of our congregation will be looking for Madison. David Hartwell shook Thomas's hand gratefully. Thank you, Thomas. We can't just sit and wait. We have to do something. Detective Thompson appreciated the community's desire to help, but she also needed to ensure that any volunteer search efforts didn't compromise potential evidence. I'm going to coordinate with your search teams, she told Thomas. We need to be systematic and careful. If Madison was taken against her will, the person responsible might have left evidence that we can't afford to contaminate. As the official investigation continued through the night, Detective Thompson made a discovery that would change the direction of the entire case. While reviewing the church's security system, she learned that Riverside Fellowship had recently installed new security cameras, including one that monitored the side door where Madison had presumably exited the building. Pastor Richardson, Detective Thompson said urgently, I need to see your security footage from tonight. Do you have access to the system? Pastor Jeremy nodded, though he looked exhausted and overwhelmed. Yes, Kevin Barnes showed me how to access it when we had the system installed last month. The main computer is in the church office. Together, they returned to the church building and accessed the security system. The timestamp showed clear footage of the fellowship hall entrance, the main sanctuary, and most importantly, the side door where Madison had apparently left the building. As they scrolled through the evening's footage, Detective Thompson and Pastor Jeremy could see the youth group members arriving for their meeting, the normal activities throughout the evening, and then something that made Detective Thompson's blood run cold. At 8:41 p.m., the security camera clearly showed Madison Hartwell walking toward the side door. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, just barely visible at the edge of the camera's range, was the shadow of another person. The figure was too obscured to identify, but it was clearly someone who had been inside the church building during the youth group meeting. Pastor Richardson, Detective Thompson said grimly, I need a complete list of everyone who was in this building tonight. Not just the youth group members, everyone. Staff, volunteers, anyone who might have had legitimate access to the building. The security footage confirmed Detective Thompson's worst fears. Madison Hartwell hadn't simply wandered away from the church. She had been led or coerced to leave by someone who had been inside the building during the youth group meeting. The question now was whether that person was someone the church community knew and trusted, or whether an outsider had somehow gained access to the building. As Sunday morning approached, the search for Madison Hartwell was about to become the most intensive missing person investigation in Grand Forks' recent history. Detective Thompson had already contacted the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation for additional resources, and plans were underway to bring in search dogs and volunteers from across the region. But most unsettling of all was the realization that Madison's beautiful prayer about trusting God during uncertain times might have been her last words captured on camera before vanishing into the North Dakota night. The video that was meant to be a blessing to the congregation had become evidence in a criminal investigation that would test the faith of everyone who loved Madison Hartwell. Sunday morning, October 13th, dawned gray and cold in Grand Forks, with temperatures hovering just above freezing and a sharp wind blowing from the northwest. By 6 a.m., more than 200 volunteers had gathered in the parking lot of Riverside Fellowship Church, their breath visible in the crisp air as Detective Sarah Thompson organized them into systematic search teams. The crowd included members not only from Riverside Fellowship but from churches across Grand Forks and the surrounding communities. Faith Community Church, where Officer Chen attended, had canceled their morning service to join the search. St. Michael's Catholic Church had dismissed their early Mass attendees with instructions to help look for Madison. Even the local mosque and synagogue had sent volunteers, demonstrating the way Madison's disappearance had unified the entire community across religious lines. David and Susan Hartwell stood near the church entrance, their faces etched with exhaustion and worry. Neither had slept more than an hour or two, and Susan's nursing training couldn't prevent her from imagining the worst-case scenarios for her missing daughter. We need to stay hopeful, David said quietly to his wife as they watched the volunteers organize. Madison is strong and smart. If anyone can survive whatever has happened to her, it's our daughter. Susan nodded, though her eyes betrayed her fear. David, what if we never find her? What if whoever took her? She couldn't finish the sentence. Pastor Jeremy approached the couple, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee and a folder containing printed copies of Madison's most recent photograph. "David, Susan, I know how helpless this feels, but look around you," he said, gesturing toward the crowd of volunteers. "This entire community loves Madison. We're not going to stop looking until we bring her home." Detective Thompson had divided the volunteers into teams of 6, each led by an experienced outdoorsman or law enforcement officer. The search area encompassed a 5-mile radius around Riverside Fellowship Church, including residential neighborhoods, the Red River Corridor, abandoned buildings, and the rural farmland that surrounded Grand Forks. "I want everyone to understand something," Detective Thompson announced to the assembled crowd through a megaphone. "This is a criminal investigation, not just a search and rescue operation. Do not touch or move anything that seems out of place. If you find anything that might be evidence, clothing, personal items, signs of disturbance, call for a law enforcement officer immediately." Thomas Mitchell, the head deacon, had coordinated with the Red Cross to establish a command center in the church fellowship hall. Volunteers staffed phones to coordinate with search teams, provided food and drinks to the searchers, and maintained detailed maps showing which areas had been covered. As the teams dispersed throughout Grand Forks, Detective Thompson returned to her investigation of the church building and the people who had access to it. The security footage had confirmed that someone inside the building had approached Madison near the side door, but the image quality wasn't sufficient to identify the person. "Pastor Richardson," Detective Thompson said as they sat in his office, "I need you to think carefully about everyone who was in the building last night. Not just the youth group, anyone who might have had access." Pastor Jeremy consulted his notes from the previous evening. "Besides the youth group members and myself, Dorothy Lewis was here until about 7:30 p.m. working on the church bulletin. Kevin Barnes was doing some maintenance on the heating system in the basement until around 8 p.m. And Thomas Mitchell stopped by briefly around 7:45 p.m. to drop off some paperwork for this morning's service." Detective Thompson made detailed notes about each person. "I'll need to interview all 3 of them today. Is there anyone else who might have had a key or access to the building?" "Well, we have about 12 people total with keys," Pastor Jeremy replied. "The deacons, the church secretary, our maintenance staff, and a few long-term volunteers. But I can't imagine any of them would hurt Madison. These are people who've known her since she was a child." The detective understood Pastor Jeremy's reluctance to suspect members of his own congregation, but her experience had taught her that predators often hid within communities where they could gain trust and access to victims. Meanwhile, the search teams were making their first reports back to the command center. Team Alpha, led by Officer Chen, had covered the residential area directly north of the church without finding any trace of Madison. Team Beta had searched the Red River banks and the Greenway Trail system, also without success. But Team Gamma, led by retired Police Sergeant William Davis, made a discovery that sent a chill through everyone involved in the search. In a small park approximately 2 miles from Riverside Fellowship Church, they found Madison's cell phone hidden beneath a pile of fallen leaves near a playground. "The phone is password protected, but it appears to be undamaged," Sergeant Davis reported to Detective Thompson via radio. "It was deliberately concealed, not dropped accidentally." Detective Thompson immediately dispatched the crime scene unit to the park to process the phone and search for additional evidence. The location where the phone was found was significant. The park was not on any direct route between the church and Madison's home, suggesting that whoever had taken her had driven her there specifically to dispose of the phone. Back at Riverside Fellowship, Detective Thompson interviewed Dorothy Lewis, the 62-year-old church secretary who had been in the building until 7:30 p.m. the previous evening. Mrs. Lewis was a lifelong member of the congregation who had known Madison since birth. "Madison is like a granddaughter to me," Mrs. Lewis said, tears flowing freely as she spoke with Detective Thompson in the church office. "I watched her grow up in this church, saw her get baptized, watched her develop into such a faithful young woman. I can't imagine anyone wanting to hurt her." "Mrs. Lewis, when you left the church last night at 7:30, did you notice anything unusual? Any cars in the parking lot that you didn't recognize, or anyone acting strangely?" "Nothing at all," Mrs. Lewis replied. I used the main entrance, and the parking lot was mostly empty except for Pastor Jeremy's car and a few others that I assumed belonged to youth group parents dropping off their children. Detective Thompson's next interview was with Kevin Barnes, the church maintenance supervisor. Kevin, a quiet man of 51, had been working on the church's heating system in the basement during the youth group meeting. I was focused on my work, Kevin explained when Detective Thompson found him at his home on Sunday afternoon. The heating system has been acting up, and I wanted to get it fixed before it gets really cold. I barely heard the kids upstairs. Kevin, did you see Madison at all last night? Did you interact with any of the youth group members? Kevin shook his head. I saw some of them when I first arrived, but I went straight to the mechanical room and stayed there until I finished around 8 p.m. I left through the basement exit, so I didn't see anyone on my way out. Detective Thompson made note of Kevin's timeline, which would need to be verified against the security footage. She also requested that Kevin provide details about exactly which areas of the church basement he had accessed during his work. The third interview was with Thomas Mitchell, the head deacon who had briefly visited the church to drop off paperwork. Thomas was a respected member of the community, having served as Grand Forks Central High School's principal for 28 years before retiring. I only stayed for about 10 minutes, Thomas told Detective Thompson. I had some financial reports that Pastor Jeremy needed for this morning's board meeting, so I dropped them off in his office and left. I could hear the youth group in the fellowship hall, but I didn't want to interrupt their activities. Did you see Madison specifically? Did you interact with her or any of the other youth group members? I saw her briefly when I walked past the fellowship hall, Thomas replied. She waved and smiled, just like she always does. Madison is one of our most beloved young people, Detective Thompson. The idea that someone would hurt her is incomprehensible to our church family. As Sunday evening approached, the search teams had covered nearly half of their assigned areas without finding any additional evidence. The discovery of Madison's phone had provided one crucial clue, that whoever had taken her had driven her at least 2 miles from the church, but it had also eliminated one potential method of tracking her location. Detective Thompson called a meeting of all law enforcement personnel involved in the investigation to review what they had learned during the first 24 hours. We know that Madison was led or coerced to leave Riverside Fellowship Church at approximately 8:41 p.m. on Saturday evening, Detective Thompson summarized for the assembled officers. We know that her cell phone was deliberately hidden in Riverside Park, approximately 2 miles from the church. And we know that whoever approached her in the church had to have been someone with legitimate access to the building. Officer Chen raised his hand. Detective Thompson, have we eliminated the possibility that Madison left voluntarily? Could she have been meeting someone she knew? It's possible, Detective Thompson acknowledged, but highly unlikely. Madison's parents, her best friend, and Pastor Richardson all describe her as extremely responsible and communicative. She would never disappear without telling someone where she was going, especially not during a church activity. As the meeting continued, Detective Thompson outlined the investigation's next steps. Tomorrow morning, we're expanding the search area to include the rural communities surrounding Grand Forks. We're also bringing in cadaver dogs to search areas that might be difficult for human searchers to access thoroughly. The mention of cadaver dogs sent a somber chill through the room. Everyone involved in the investigation hoped that Madison was still alive somewhere, but after 24 hours with no contact, the statistical likelihood of finding her alive was beginning to decrease. Meanwhile, at the Hartwell family home, Madison's parents were struggling to maintain hope as the hours continued to pass without any word about their daughter. Friends from Riverside Fellowship Church had been bringing food and offering support, but David and Susan felt helpless as they waited for news. I keep thinking about that prayer video, Susan said to David as they sat in their living room surrounded by photos of Madison from throughout her 17 years. She looked so peaceful, so full of faith. How could someone hurt a girl who was praying for others just minutes before she disappeared? David held his wife close as they both tried to make sense of the incomprehensible. Susan, we have to believe that God is protecting Madison somehow. We have to trust that He's going to bring her home to us. But even as David spoke those words of faith, doubt gnawed at his heart. How could a loving God allow such a terrible thing to happen to their daughter, especially right after she had offered such a beautiful prayer of trust and faith? As Sunday night turned into Monday morning, the investigation into Madison Hartwell's disappearance was about to take a dramatic turn. Detective Thompson had requested that the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team be contacted, given the suspicious circumstances and the possibility that Madison had been taken across state lines. The security footage from Riverside Fellowship Church was being enhanced by the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation's digital forensics team, in hopes of identifying the shadowy figure who had approached Madison near the side door. Most importantly, Detective Thompson had decided to conduct polygraph examinations of everyone who had been in the church building during the youth group meeting. The investigation was about to focus intensively on the people Madison had trusted most, the very community that was now desperately searching for her. The search for Madison Hartwell was far from over, but it was becoming clear that her disappearance was not a random act of violence. Someone in Grand Forks knew exactly what had happened to the 17-year-old girl whose last recorded words had been a prayer of faith and trust in God's plan, even during uncertain times. Monday morning brought devastating news that would forever change the direction of the Madison Hartwell investigation. At 7:30 a.m., Detective Sarah Thompson received a call from the digital forensics team at the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation that made her blood run cold. "Detective Thompson, we've enhanced the security footage from Riverside Fellowship Church," said Agent Rebecca Williams, the lead forensics specialist. "We can now clearly identify the person who approached Madison Hartwell before her disappearance." Detective Thompson gripped her phone tightly. "Who is it?" "Kevin Barnes, the church maintenance supervisor. The enhanced footage shows him following Madison toward the side door at 8:41 p.m. There's no question about the identification." The revelation hit Detective Thompson like a physical blow. Kevin Barnes, the quiet maintenance worker who had seemed so cooperative during his interview, had lied about his whereabouts and his interaction with Madison. More disturbing still, Kevin had intimate knowledge of the church building, including all the entrances, exits, and security systems. "Agent Williams, I need that enhanced footage immediately," Detective Thompson said. "And I need a background check on Kevin Barnes going back 20 years. Something tells me we're going to find things about him that the church community never suspected." Within 2 hours, Detective Thompson had assembled a team to arrest Kevin Barnes at his home on the outskirts of Grand Forks. The small house sat on 5 acres of rural property, surrounded by outbuildings and heavy woods that could easily conceal evidence of a crime. As the police vehicles approached Kevin's property, Detective Thompson felt the familiar mixture of hope and dread that accompanied major breaks in missing person cases. If Kevin had taken Madison, there was still a chance she was alive somewhere on his property. But there was also the possibility that they were about to discover something much worse. Kevin Barnes answered his door wearing work clothes and an expression of surprised innocence that Detective Thompson had seen countless times from guilty suspects trying to maintain their facades. "Kevin Barnes, you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Madison Hartwell," Detective Thompson announced as officers moved to handcuff him. "You have the right to remain silent." "This is a mistake," Kevin protested as the handcuffs clicked into place. "I told you yesterday that I didn't see Madison after I finished my work. I went home at 8 p.m., just like I said." "Kevin, we have security footage showing you following Madison to the side door at 8:41 p.m., Detective Thompson replied firmly. "We know you lied to us yesterday, and we know you were the last person to see Madison before she disappeared." As Kevin was placed in the police vehicle, search teams immediately began combing his property for any sign of Madison. The main house, the garage, 2 storage sheds, and a workshop were all systematically searched while Kevin was transported to the Grand Forks Police Department for interrogation. Back at the police station, Detective Thompson prepared for what she knew would be the most important interview of her career. Madison Hartwell had been missing for more than 36 hours, and if she was still alive, time was running out to find her. "Kevin," Detective Thompson began as she sat across from him in the interrogation room, "I want you to understand something. Right now, you're only facing kidnapping charges. But if Madison dies because you won't tell us where she is, you'll be facing murder charges. This is your opportunity to do the right thing. Kevin stared at the table, his hands shaking slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't kidnap anyone. Detective Thompson placed printed screenshots from the enhanced security footage on the table in front of Kevin. The images clearly showed him following Madison through the church corridor toward the side door. Kevin, there's no point in denying this anymore. We have video evidence of you following Madison. We know you lied about leaving the church at 8 p.m. What we don't know is why you took her and where she is now. For several minutes, Kevin continued to deny any wrongdoing, insisting that the security footage must be wrong or that he had been misidentified. But Detective Thompson had interrogated hundreds of suspects during her career, and she could see the cracks beginning to form in Kevin's composure. Kevin, let me tell you what I think happened, Detective Thompson said, leaning forward across the table. I think you've been watching Madison for months, maybe even years. I think you've been using your access to the church building to observe her during youth group meetings and other activities. And I think Saturday night, when you saw an opportunity to get her alone, you took it. Kevin's facade finally began to crumble. Tears welled up in his eyes, and his breathing became rapid and shallow. You don't understand, he whispered. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then help me understand, Kevin. Tell me what really happened Saturday night. The confession that followed would horrify everyone who heard it. Kevin Barnes admitted that he had been obsessed with Madison Hartwell for more than 2 years, using his maintenance duties at the church as opportunities to watch her and learn her routines. She was so pure, so perfect, Kevin said, his voice barely audible. I never meant to hurt her. I just wanted to talk to her, to tell her how I felt about her. But when I approached her at the church, she got scared and started to scream. Detective Thompson felt sick as Kevin described how he had covered Madison's mouth to prevent her from alerting others, and how he had convinced her to leave the church building by threatening to hurt other members of the youth group if she didn't cooperate. Where is Madison now, Kevin? Detective Thompson demanded. Is she alive? Kevin nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. She's in the old grain silo on my property. I locked her in there because I didn't know what else to do. I was going to let her go, I swear. I just needed time to think. Detective Thompson immediately radioed the search teams at Kevin's property, directing them to the grain silo. As she waited for confirmation that Madison had been found, she continued questioning Kevin about his actions over the past 36 hours. Have you hurt Madison physically? Has she had food and water? I brought her some water and crackers this morning, Kevin said. I didn't want to hurt her. I couldn't let her go because she would tell everyone what I did. 20 minutes later, Detective Thompson received the radio call she had been praying for. We've found her. Madison Hartwell is alive. We're transporting her to Altru Hospital for medical evaluation. The news of Madison's rescue spread through Grand Forks like wildfire. At Riverside Fellowship Church, where hundreds of volunteers were still gathered to continue the search, shouts of joy and relief echoed through the building as Pastor Jeremy announced that Madison had been found alive. David and Susan Hartwell raced to Altru Hospital, where Susan's colleagues and the nursing staff had already prepared to provide the best possible care for their daughter. When they were finally allowed to see Madison, she was dehydrated and traumatized but physically unharmed. Mom, Dad, Madison whispered as she hugged her parents in the hospital room, I prayed the whole time. I kept remembering that prayer I said on the video, about trusting God even when things seem impossible. I knew you would find me. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the emergency room physician who examined Madison, confirmed that while she was suffering from dehydration and emotional trauma, she had not been physically or sexually assaulted. Madison is going to need counseling to process what she's been through, Dr. Walsh explained to the Hartwell family. But physically, she's going to be fine. She's a remarkably strong young woman. As Madison began her recovery, the criminal case against Kevin Barnes moved forward rapidly. The charges against him included kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, stalking, and making terroristic threats. Given the premeditated nature of his crimes and the trauma inflicted on Madison and her family, prosecutors indicated they would seek the maximum possible sentence. But perhaps the most difficult aspect of Madison's ordeal was the realization that her attacker had been someone she had trusted, someone who had been part of her church community for years. Kevin Barnes had attended services at Riverside Fellowship irregularly, but he had been a familiar presence around the building, and church members had never suspected that he posed any danger. "This is going to be hard for our congregation to process," Pastor Jeremy told Detective Thompson as they discussed the case. "Kevin was quiet and kept to himself, but he was part of our church family. Learning that he was capable of something like this challenges our ability to trust." Detective Thompson understood the pastor's struggle. "In my experience, predators often hide within communities where they can gain access and trust." Kevin Barnes used his position as maintenance supervisor to study Madison's routines and plan his attack. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was a calculated crime by someone who exploited the trust of your church community. The investigation revealed additional disturbing details about Kevin Barnes' obsession with Madison. Searches of his home uncovered hundreds of photographs he had taken of her during church activities, detailed notes about her schedule and activities, and a journal documenting his fantasies about approaching her. Kevin Barnes was clearly suffering from erotomania, a delusional disorder where the person believes they have a romantic relationship with someone who doesn't reciprocate their feelings, explained Dr. Michael Chen, a forensic psychologist who evaluated Kevin for the court. He convinced himself that Madison had feelings for him, despite having no actual relationship with her. As the community of Grand Forks processed the shocking revelation about Kevin Barnes, Madison Hartwell began the long process of healing from her traumatic experience. With the support of her family, her church community, and professional counselors, she gradually returned to her normal activities. 1 month after her rescue, Madison made a decision that would inspire everyone who knew her. She asked Pastor Jeremy if she could share her testimony about the ordeal during a Sunday morning service at Riverside Fellowship Church. "I want people to know that God never left me, even in that dark place," Madison told her parents as they discussed her decision to speak publicly about her experience. "I want them to know that the prayer I said on that video wasn't just words, it was faith that sustained me through the worst experience of my life." On Sunday morning, November 15, 2019, Madison Hartwell stood before the congregation of Riverside Fellowship Church to share her testimony. The sanctuary was packed not only with regular members but with many of the volunteers who had searched for her and community members who had prayed for her safe return. "5 weeks ago, I recorded a prayer video right here in this church," Madison began, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. "I prayed about trusting God even when things seem impossible, even when we don't understand His plan. I had no idea that within minutes, I would be put in a position where I would have to live out that faith in the most frightening way imaginable." The congregation listened in absolute silence as Madison described her ordeal, not the details of her captivity, which were too traumatic to share publicly, but the spiritual journey she had experienced during those 36 hours. "I want you all to know that God was with me every moment," Madison continued. "When I was most afraid, I remembered the words of Psalm 23, 'Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.' Those words weren't just comfort, they were truth. God's presence was real, even in that grain silo." Madison's testimony had a profound impact on everyone who heard it. Many adults in the congregation wept openly, amazed by the spiritual maturity and faith of the 17-year-old girl who had endured such trauma yet emerged with her trust in God intact. "I don't pretend to understand why God allowed this to happen to me," Madison concluded. "But I do know that He used even this terrible experience to strengthen my faith and to show me that His love is real, even in the darkest circumstances. I pray that my story will encourage others who are facing impossible situations to trust in God's goodness, even when they can't see the way forward." After Madison finished speaking, Pastor Jeremy invited the congregation to pray for her continued healing and for wisdom in how to protect other young people from similar dangers. The prayer time lasted nearly 30 minutes, with member after member standing to offer words of gratitude for Madison's safe return and requests for God's guidance in moving forward as a church community. In the weeks that followed, Madison's story spread far beyond Grand Forks, inspiring other young people facing difficult circumstances. Her prayer video from that fateful Saturday evening was viewed millions of times on social media, with viewers around the world commenting on the powerful example of faith under fire that Madison had demonstrated. Kevin Barnes was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing hearing, Madison chose to attend and offered a statement that surprised everyone in the courtroom. "Mr. Barnes, I forgive you for what you did to me," Madison said as she faced her attacker. "I don't understand why you chose to hurt me, but I know that holding on to anger and hatred would only continue to hurt me. I pray that you will find genuine repentance and healing during your time in prison." Kevin Barnes broke down in tears as Madison spoke, and later wrote her a letter from prison expressing his deep remorse for his actions and his gratitude for her forgiveness. The letter, which Madison shared with her permission, became another powerful testimony to the transformative power of Christian forgiveness. 6 months after Madison Hartwell's rescue, life in Grand Forks had begun to return to a new normal, but the impact of her ordeal and testimony continued to ripple through the community in unexpected ways. Riverside Fellowship Church had experienced unprecedented growth, with dozens of new families joining the congregation after hearing about Madison's story of faith during crisis. Pastor Jeremy Richardson found himself counseling not only church members but people from across the region who had been inspired by Madison's testimony and wanted to explore faith for themselves. The church's small counseling ministry expanded rapidly, requiring additional staff and training to meet the demand. Madison's story has opened doors for gospel conversations that we never could have imagined, Pastor Jeremy shared during a staff meeting in April 2020. "People are asking questions about faith because they've seen a 17-year-old girl demonstrate genuine trust in God during the most terrifying experience of her life." Madison herself had become a reluctant but powerful speaker, receiving invitations to share her testimony at churches, schools, and conferences throughout North Dakota and beyond. Despite her initial nervousness about public speaking, she felt called to use her experience to encourage others facing their own impossible circumstances. One of her most impactful speaking engagements came at Grand Forks Central High School, where Madison was completing her senior year. The school had initially been hesitant to allow religious content in an assembly, but Madison's focus on resilience, courage, and overcoming trauma resonated with educators who were looking for positive role models for their students. "Some of you might think that faith is weakness," Madison told the assembly of nearly 1,500 students. "But I want you to know that faith gave me strength when I had nothing else. Faith helped me remember that I was loved and valuable, even when someone was treating me as less than human. Faith reminded me that my story wasn't over, even when it seemed like it might be." The response from Madison's classmates was overwhelming. The school counseling office reported a significant increase in students seeking help for various struggles, many specifically mentioning Madison's example as motivation to reach out for support rather than suffering in silence. Emma Catherine Wells, Madison's fellow youth group member and a talented artist, created a painting inspired by Madison's testimony. The painting depicted a young woman kneeling in prayer, surrounded by darkness but illuminated by a beam of light from above. Emma presented the painting to Madison as a graduation gift, and it now hangs in the youth room at Riverside Fellowship Church. "Madison's story taught me that art can be a form of prayer," Emma explained as she presented the painting. "When I was working on this, I kept thinking about how God's light penetrates even the darkest places. Madison proved that to all of us." Madison's best friend, Olivia Rose Martinez, had struggled with guilt and anxiety following Madison's kidnapping. She had been the last person to see Madison before her disappearance, and despite everyone's assurances that she wasn't to blame, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she should have done something differently. Through counseling and Madison's own reassurances, Olivia gradually worked through her trauma and discovered a calling to crisis counseling. She changed her college plans to pursue a degree in psychology with a focus on trauma recovery, inspired by the professional counselors who had helped both her and Madison heal from their experience. "Madison's strength inspired me to want to help others find that same kind of resilience," Olivia explained to her parents as she filled out college applications. "I want to be the kind of counselor who can help people discover that they're stronger than they think they are." The impact of Madison's story reached far beyond her immediate circle of friends and church family. Detective Sarah Thompson, who had led the investigation into Madison's disappearance, found that the case had profoundly affected her own faith journey. "I've been a police officer for 15 years, Detective Thompson shared during a law enforcement conference on missing person cases. "I've seen the worst that humanity has to offer, and I'll be honest, it had made me cynical about faith and goodness. But watching Madison Hartwell emerge from a traumatic kidnapping with her faith not only intact but strengthened made me reconsider my own spiritual life." Detective Thompson began attending church for the first time since childhood and eventually became an active member of Faith Community Church, where Officer Michael Chin attended. Her experience with Madison's case became a powerful testimony within the law enforcement community about the importance of hope and faith, even in the darkest circumstances. The security improvements implemented at Riverside Fellowship Church following Madison's kidnapping became a model for other churches throughout the region. Pastor Jeremy worked with local law enforcement to develop a comprehensive safety protocol that balanced security with the welcoming atmosphere that churches wanted to maintain. "We can't live in fear," Pastor Jeremy explained to other pastors during a safety seminar. "But we also have a responsibility to protect the people who trust us with their safety." Madison's experience taught us that we need to be wise and vigilant without becoming paranoid or unwelcoming. Thomas Mitchell, the head deacon who had coordinated much of the search effort for Madison, spearheaded the church's new safety ministry. The ministry included background checks for all volunteers working with children and youth, improved lighting in parking areas, and a buddy system for young people attending evening activities. "We learned that evil can hide anywhere, even within our church community," Thomas told the congregation during a presentation about the new safety measures. "But we also learned that God's people will rally together to protect and support each other when facing crisis. Both lessons are important for our future." As Madison prepared to graduate from high school in May 2020, she faced decisions about college and career that had been significantly influenced by her experience. Originally planning to study business, she now felt called to pursue a degree in ministry or counseling, with the goal of helping others navigate trauma and crisis. "My experience changed my perspective on what's really important in life," Madison explained to her parents as they discussed college options. "I want to spend my life helping people discover the same hope and strength that carried me through my darkest hours." Madison ultimately chose to attend North Dakota State University in Fargo, where she would major in psychology with a minor in theology. Her goal was to become a licensed counselor specializing in faith-based trauma recovery, combining professional training with the spiritual insights she had gained through her own experience. The scholarship fund established in Madison's honor by the Grand Forks community had grown to more than $50,000, providing support for other young people pursuing careers in counseling, ministry, or crisis intervention. Madison insisted that the scholarship be awarded based on character and calling rather than academic achievement alone. "I want this scholarship to help young people who feel called to serve others, even if they're not the strongest students academically," Madison told the scholarship committee. "Sometimes the people who can help others the most are those who have faced their own struggles and learned to overcome them." 1 year after her rescue, Madison returned to the grain silo where she had been held captive, accompanied by her parents, Pastor Jeremy, and Detective Thompson. The visit was part of her ongoing therapy process, designed to help her reclaim power over the traumatic memories associated with the location. "Standing here now, I can see how God was protecting me even in this place," Madison said as she looked at the old grain silo that had been her prison for 36 hours. "I was scared and alone, but I was never truly alone. God's presence was real, even here." Madison's therapist, Dr. Lisa Anderson, had encouraged the visit as a way of demonstrating Madison's growth and resilience. "Madison has done remarkable work in processing her trauma," Dr. Anderson explained to Madison's parents. "Her faith has been a tremendous asset in her healing process, providing her with a framework for finding meaning and purpose even in suffering." The prayer video that Madison had recorded on the night of her disappearance continued to impact people around the world. The video had been translated into more than 20 languages and was being used by churches and counseling organizations as an example of faith during crisis. I never imagined that a simple prayer I offered during youth group would reach so many people, Madison reflected during an interview with a Christian magazine. But I think it shows how God can use even our most frightening experiences to bring hope to others who are struggling. Madison's parents, David and Susan Hartwell, had also experienced significant spiritual growth through their daughter's ordeal. David had taken a more active role in church leadership, serving as a deacon and helping to develop the church's crisis response protocols. Susan had started a support group for parents of children who had experienced trauma. Our family learned that faith isn't about avoiding suffering, Susan explained to the support group during one of their meetings. Faith is about finding God's presence and purpose even in the midst of suffering. Madison taught us that lesson better than any sermon ever could. The Grand Forks community had rallied around the Hartwell family in ways that demonstrated the best of small-town solidarity. Local businesses had donated services and supplies during the search for Madison. Neighbors had provided meals and support during her recovery. The high school had accommodated Madison's need for modified schedules and additional counseling support. We learned that we're not just individuals facing life's challenges alone, David Hartwell told a community service organization. We're part of a community that will come together to support each other during crisis. That's a powerful thing, and it's something we don't want to take for granted. As Madison's high school graduation approached, the entire community prepared to celebrate not just her academic achievement but her remarkable demonstration of faith and resilience. The graduation ceremony would include special recognition of Madison's courage and the positive impact her testimony had made on the Grand Forks community. Madison Hartwell represents the best of what our young people can become, said Dr. Rebecca Johnson, the principal of Grand Forks Central High School. She faced an unimaginable trial and emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more committed to serving others. She's an inspiration to everyone who knows her story. The commencement address at Madison's graduation was delivered by Dr. Michael Chen, the forensic psychologist who had evaluated Kevin Barnes during his trial. Dr. Chen chose to focus his remarks on resilience, faith, and the power of young people to overcome adversity and make positive impacts on their communities. Class of 2020, you have among you a young woman who demonstrated that faith and courage can triumph over fear and evil, Dr. Chen told the assembled graduates and their families. Madison Hartwell's example shows us that our responses to crisis define us more than the crises themselves. As you move forward into your adult lives, remember that you have the power to choose hope over despair, courage over fear, and faith over doubt. After receiving her diploma, Madison was presented with a special community service award recognizing her positive impact on Grand Forks and her commitment to helping others. The standing ovation from the packed auditorium lasted nearly 5 minutes, with many audience members moved to tears by the recognition of Madison's remarkable journey. As Madison looked out at the crowd of family, friends, teachers, and community members who had supported her through the most difficult period of her life, she was reminded once again of the truth she had discovered in that grain silo, that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. Thank you for teaching me that faith is not about having all the answers, Madison said during her brief acceptance speech. Faith is about trusting that God has all the answers, even when we can't see them. Thank you for showing me that love is stronger than fear, and that hope is always possible, even in impossible circumstances. The prayer video that had been recorded just minutes before Madison's disappearance had become more than just evidence in a criminal case or inspiration for online viewers. It had become a testament to the power of faith to sustain hope during the darkest trials, and a reminder that God's presence is real even when circumstances seem to suggest otherwise. As Madison Hartwell prepared to begin the next chapter of her life, her story continued to inspire people around the world who were facing their own impossible circumstances. Her experience had demonstrated that faith is not a guarantee against suffering, but it is a promise that suffering need not have the final word in our stories. The last prayer recorded on video in the basement of Riverside Fellowship Church had indeed been answered, not in the way anyone would have chosen, but in a way that had brought hope, healing, and renewed faith to countless people who needed to know that God's love is stronger than human evil, and that His light shines brightest in the darkest places. Madison's story proved that sometimes our greatest trials become our most powerful testimonies, and that God can use even our worst experiences to bring hope and healing to others who desperately need to know that they are not alone. The young woman who had prayed about trusting God during uncertain times had learned to live that trust in the most uncertain circumstances imaginable, and her faith had not only sustained her but had become a source of strength for countless others. As the sun set over Grand Forks on graduation night, Madison Hartwell looked forward to a future filled with opportunities to serve others and share the hope that had carried her through her darkest hours. Her last prayer on video had become the first chapter of a story that would continue to inspire faith, courage, and hope for years to come.